Hey guys, tonight we explore the quiet, methodical world of medieval society, where laughter was not simply an expression of joy or amusement, but rather a carefully regulated social behaviour that could lead to serious consequences when expressed at inappropriate times or directed toward inappropriate subjects. From church services where even the smallest chuckle could be interpreted as blasphemy, to royal courts where mocking the wrong person might result in severe punishment, we'll discover the gentle but firm social rules that governed when, where, and at whom medieval people were permitted to laugh. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together through the measured, careful world of medieval humour, where social order was maintained through precise understanding of what was acceptable to find amusing and what was absolutely forbidden. Medieval society was built upon a foundation of hierarchy, tradition, and religious devotion that created clear boundaries around acceptable behaviour in all aspects of daily life. Laughter, while not forbidden entirely, was understood to be a powerful social force that could either reinforce proper order or undermine the stability that communities depended upon for their survival and prosperity. The regulation of laughter was not arbitrary or cruel, but rather reflected a deep understanding of how humour could affect social relationships, religious devotion, and community harmony. Medieval people understood that laughter could bring people together in shared joy, but also that inappropriate laughter could cause offence, disrupt important activities, and challenge the authority structures that kept society functioning peacefully. The consequences for inappropriate laughter varied depending on the circumstances, the status of the person laughing, and the nature of what they found amusing. These consequences were designed not simply to punish, but to educate both the offender and the broader community about the importance of maintaining proper behaviour in all social situations. Understanding these restrictions on laughter provides insight into medieval values, social structures, and the daily realities of life in communities where everyone knew their place and understood their responsibilities to maintain the social order that protected and sustained their way of life. Religious observance formed the cornerstone of medieval life, with church services representing the most sacred and solemn activities in which community members participated. These services were not merely weekly obligations, but rather profound spiritual experiences where the divine was believed to be directly present among the congregation, making any disruption or inappropriate behaviour a serious matter that affected both individual souls and community spiritual welfare. The structure of medieval religious services followed ancient traditions and careful protocols that had been developed over centuries of Christian practice. Every element of these services, from the opening prayers to the final benediction, was designed to create an atmosphere of reverence and spiritual concentration that allowed participants to focus entirely on their relationship with the divine and their responsibilities as members of the Christian community. Laughter during these sacred ceremonies was understood to be particularly inappropriate because it demonstrated a lack of proper respect for the presence of God and the serious spiritual business being conducted. Medieval theology taught that church buildings were literally the house of God, and that inappropriate behaviour within these sacred spaces was equivalent to showing disrespect in the presence of divine majesty itself. The consequences for laughing during religious services reflected the seriousness with which medieval communities regarded this breach of proper behaviour. Those who disrupted services through inappropriate laughter might face immediate removal from the church, followed by formal penance that could include public confession of their transgression, additional prayers and religious observances, and sometimes temporary exclusion from participation in certain religious activities. Public penance for disrupting religious services often involved standing outside the church during subsequent services, wearing simple clothing that indicated their status as penitents, and asking for forgiveness from community members as they entered and left the church. This public acknowledgement of wrongdoing served both to demonstrate the seriousness of the offence and to educate other community members about the importance of maintaining proper behaviour during religious observances. The religious authorities who administered these consequences understood that their role was not simply to punish inappropriate behaviour, but to guide community members toward proper spiritual development and to maintain the sacred atmosphere that made meaningful religious experience possible for everyone who participated in church services. More serious or repeated offences of disrupting religious services through laughter could result in more severe consequences, including formal excommunication that separated the offender from the religious community and the spiritual support that community membership provided. These extreme measures were rarely necessary, as most community members understood and respected the importance of maintaining proper behaviour during religious activities. The education of children regarding appropriate behaviour during religious services began at an early age, with parents and religious instructors teaching young people about the sacred nature of church activities and the importance of showing proper respect through quiet, attentive participation. This early education helped ensure that inappropriate behaviour was prevented rather than punished. Community pressure also played a role in maintaining proper behaviour during religious services, as congregation members understood that everyone's spiritual experience was affected by the behaviour of others, and that maintaining sacred atmosphere was a shared responsibility that required everyone's cooperation and mutual support. The theological understanding that underlay these behavioural expectations was based on the belief that religious services created opportunities for direct communication with the divine, and that anything that interfered with this communication was not merely rude or disruptive, but actually harmful to the spiritual welfare of all participants. Medieval religious leaders regularly reminded their congregations about the importance of proper behaviour during services, explaining that reverent participation was both a sign of personal faith and a contribution to the spiritual benefit that all community members could receive through shared worship and prayer. The long-term effect of these expectations and consequences was to create religious communities where sacred activities could proceed without disruption, allowing participants to focus on their spiritual development and their relationships with both the divine and their fellow community members in an atmosphere of mutual respect and shared devotion. Medieval society held complex attitudes toward physical disabilities and ailments, viewing them sometimes as divine tests of faith, sometimes as consequences of sin, and sometimes simply as unfortunate circumstances that required community support and Christian charity. However, regardless of how disabilities were interpreted, mocking or laughing at those who suffered from physical limitations was universally condemned as behaviour that violated both religious principles and basic human decency. The theological foundation for protecting disabled individuals from mockery was rooted in Christian teaching that all human beings were created in the image of God and deserved respect and compassion regardless of their physical condition. Medieval religious instruction emphasized that mocking the afflicted was equivalent to mocking God's creation, and showed a dangerous lack of Christian charity that could endanger the mocker's own spiritual welfare. Community attitudes toward disability were also influenced by practical considerations, as medieval communities understood that anyone could become disabled through accident, illness, or age, and that maintaining a culture of mutual support and protection was essential for everyone's long-term security and welfare. Allowing mockery of the disabled would undermine the social bonds that provided essential support for vulnerable community members. The consequences for mocking disabled individuals were designed to be both educational and remedial, helping offenders understand the harm their behaviour caused, while demonstrating to the broader community the importance of maintaining compassionate attitudes toward those who faced physical challenges. These consequences often included requirements to provide assistance to disabled community members, allowing offenders to develop personal understanding of the difficulties faced by those they had mocked. Public penance for mocking disabilities might involve serving disabled individuals in various capacities, such as helping with daily tasks, providing transportation, or assisting with work activities that were difficult for those with physical limitations. This service was intended to develop empathy and understanding, while providing practical benefit to those who needed assistance. Religious authorities often impose spiritual consequences for mocking the disabled, including requirements for additional prayers, charitable donations, and participation in religious activities that emphasize Christian charity and compassion. These spiritual exercises were designed to address the underlying attitudes that led to inappropriate behavior while strengthening the offender's commitment to Christian values. Community leaders understood that protecting disabled individuals from mockery was essential for maintaining social harmony and ensuring that all community members could participate in community life without fear of harassment or humiliation. This protection was seen as a fundamental responsibility of community leadership and an essential element of just governance. The education of children regarding proper treatment of disabled individuals was considered crucial for preventing inappropriate behaviour and developing lifelong attitudes of compassion and respect. Parents and teachers regularly emphasised that physical differences did not affect human worth, and that all community members deserved respectful treatment regardless of their physical condition. Economic consequences for mocking the disabled sometimes included fines or requirements to provide financial support for disabled individuals, recognising that inappropriate behaviour caused real harm that should be addressed through practical assistance for those who were targeted by such behaviour. Legal protections for disabled individuals were sometimes codified in local laws and regulations that specifically prohibited harassment and mockery, providing formal recourse for those who experienced such treatment and establishing clear community standards regarding acceptable behaviour toward vulnerable populations. The long-term social benefits of prohibiting mockery of the disabled included the development of more inclusive and supportive communities, where all members could contribute according to their abilities and receive assistance when needed, creating stronger social bonds and more resilient community structures. Medieval communities that successfully maintained these protective standards often developed reputations for compassion and justice that attracted new residents and fostered economic growth, demonstrating that moral behaviour and practical success were often closely connected in medieval social and economic life. Public executions in medieval times served multiple purposes beyond the administration of justice, functioning as moral instruction for community members, demonstrations of legal authority, and solemn reminders of the serious consequences that followed from criminal behaviour. These events were intended to inspire reflection on moral responsibility and respect for legal order, making inappropriate laughter or amusement particularly offensive to both legal authorities and community standards. The ceremonial aspects of public executions were carefully designed to create an atmosphere of gravity and moral seriousness that would encourage spectators to contemplate the relationship between actions and consequences while reinforcing their commitment to lawful behaviour. Every element of these proceedings, from the formal reading of charges to the final moments of the execution itself, was intended to serve educational and moral purposes that benefited the entire community. Spectators who attended public executions were expected to observe these proceedings with appropriate solemnity, recognising that they were witnessing the final resolution of serious legal matters that affected community safety and moral order. Laughter or amusement during these events was seen as showing disrespect for the legal process, lack of understanding of the moral issues involved, and inappropriate indifference to human suffering. The consequences for showing amusement at public executions reflected both the seriousness of the original crime being punished and the importance of maintaining proper respect for legal proceedings. Those who laughed or showed inappropriate amusement might face immediate removal from the execution site, followed by formal charges of disrespecting legal authority and undermining public order. Legal penalties for disrupting public executions often included fines, public penance, and requirements to participate in community service that demonstrated proper respect for legal authority and community welfare. These penalties were designed to educate offenders about their responsibilities as community members while reinforcing the importance of maintaining proper behaviour during official proceedings. Public shame was often employed as a consequence for inappropriate behaviour at executions, with offenders required to acknowledge their disrespectful behaviour publicly and ask forgiveness from community authorities and fellow citizens. This public acknowledgement served both to demonstrate the seriousness of the offence and to educate other community members about proper behaviour during legal proceedings. Religious consequences for showing amusement at executions might include requirements for additional prayers for the soul of the executed person, charitable donations to support the family of the deceased, and participation in religious services focused on themes of justice, mercy, and moral responsibility. These religious obligations were intended to develop more appropriate attitudes toward life, death, and moral accountability. Community service requirements often involved work that benefited public safety and legal order, such as assisting with maintenance of legal facilities, supporting victims of crime, or participating in community watch activities that helped prevent future criminal behaviour. This service was designed to channel the offender's attention toward constructive support for legal and social order. The education of young people regarding proper behaviour at public executions was considered essential for developing appropriate respect for legal authority and understanding of moral responsibility. Parents and teachers regularly explained that executions were serious legal proceedings that deserved respectful observation rather than entertainment or amusement. Long-term community benefits of maintaining proper behaviour at public executions included strengthened respect for legal authority, increased understanding of moral responsibility, and development of community solidarity around shared values of justice and order. These benefits contributed to more peaceful and stable community life that benefited all residents. The psychological and social impact of public executions was understood to be significant, and maintaining proper behavioural standards during these events was seen as essential for ensuring that they served their intended purposes of moral education and legal deterrence, rather than becoming sources of inappropriate entertainment or community division. Medieval legal authorities regularly reminded community members that attending public executions was a privilege that carried responsibilities for proper behaviour, and that those who could not maintain appropriate conduct would be excluded from future attendance at these important community events. The dress and customs of medieval nobility served important functions beyond personal preference or fashion, representing social hierarchy, political relationships, and cultural traditions that maintained stability and order within complex feudal systems. Noble clothing and ceremonial practices were visual symbols of authority and status that helped everyone understand their place within society and their relationships to those above and below them in the social hierarchy. The elaborate nature of a noble dress was not merely decorative or self-indulgent, but rather served as a form of visual communication that conveyed information about wealth, power, family connections, and political allegiances that was essential for maintaining complex social and political relationships. The ability to afford expensive clothing and elaborate ceremonies demonstrated the resources and connections that qualified individuals for positions of leadership and responsibility. Mocking noble dress or customs was understood to be an attack on the social order itself, challenging the authority structures that provided stability and protection for entire communities. Such mockery suggested that the mocker either failed to understand the important functions that these symbols served, or worse, deliberately intended to undermine the social system that provided security and prosperity for community members. The consequences for mocking noble dress and customs were proportioned to the severity of the offence, and the social status of both the mocker and the target of mockery. Minor offences might result in public apologies and brief periods of community service, while more serious or repeated offences could lead to significant fines, extended periods of punishment, and restrictions on social activities and economic opportunities. Public humiliation was often employed as a consequence for mocking nobility, with offenders required to acknowledge their inappropriate behaviour publicly and demonstrate proper respect for social hierarchy through formal apologies and gestures of submission. This public demonstration served both to correct the offender's behaviour and to reinforce community understanding of proper social relationships. Economic penalties for mocking noble customs often included fines calculated to cause real financial hardship, recognising that inappropriate behaviour toward nobility could have serious consequences for community relationships and economic opportunities. These penalties were designed to ensure that offenders understood the practical importance of maintaining proper respect for social superiors. Social restrictions might be imposed on those who mocked nobility, including exclusion from certain community activities, limitations on business opportunities, and reduced access to legal and social protections that depended on maintaining good standing within the community hierarchy. These restrictions demonstrated the practical consequences of failing to maintain proper social relationships. Educational requirements were sometimes imposed to help offenders understand the functions and importance of noble dress and customs, including instruction in proper etiquette, social history, and the practical benefits that stable social hierarchy provided for community welfare and individual security. Community leaders understood that maintaining proper respect for nobility was essential for preserving the political and economic relationships that provided protection, trade opportunities, and legal order for their communities. Allowing mockery of noble customs would undermine these important relationships and potentially expose communities to political and economic retaliation. Religious authorities often supported consequences for mocking nobility by teaching that social hierarchy was part of divine order and that showing disrespect for legitimate authority was contrary to Christian principles of obedience and humility. This religious support helped reinforce social messages about the importance of maintaining proper behaviour towards social superiors. The long-term benefits of maintaining proper respect for noble dress and customs included continued access to political protection, economic opportunities, and legal support that nobles could provide for communities that demonstrated appropriate loyalty and respect. These benefits were practical considerations that affected everyone's welfare and security. Training in proper behaviour toward nobility was provided through family instruction, community education, and formal ceremonies that taught appropriate responses to noble presents and customs. This training helped prevent inappropriate behaviour while developing social skills that could benefit individuals throughout their lives. The medieval church held a position of enormous authority and influence in all aspects of community life, with religious figures serving not only as spiritual guides, but also as educators, legal authorities, community leaders, and moral exemplars who provided essential services that affected everyone's daily welfare and long-term spiritual health. Ridiculing these important figures was seen as undermining the entire structure of religious and social authority that held medieval society together. Religious figures were understood to hold their positions through divine appointment, making mockery of their persons or offices equivalent to showing disrespect for divine authority itself. This theological understanding meant that inappropriate humour directed toward clergy was not merely rude or disrespectful, but actually blasphemous behaviour that could endanger both the mocker's soul and the spiritual welfare of the entire community. The practical importance of religious figures in medieval community life made their protection from ridicule a matter of community welfare, as well as religious propriety. Clergy provided essential services including education, medical care, legal guidance, and social support that communities depended upon for their survival and prosperity, making it practically important to maintain their authority and dignity. Consequences for ridiculing religious figures were administered by both religious and secular authorities, reflecting the interconnected nature of spiritual and temporal power in medieval society. These consequences were designed to address both the spiritual harm caused by irreverent behaviour and the practical damage to community relationships and religious authority. Religious penalties for mocking clergy often included formal penance that required public confession, additional prayers and religious observances, charitable donations to support church activities, and sometimes temporary exclusion from certain religious privileges such as communion or participation in religious festivals and ceremonies. Public humiliation was commonly employed to address mockery of religious figures, with offenders required to acknowledge their inappropriate behaviour before the congregation and community, demonstrating proper respect for religious authority while providing visible education for other community members about the importance of maintaining reverent attitudes toward clergy. Educational requirements might include mandatory instruction in proper religious behaviour, theological study to develop better understanding of the role and importance of religious authority, and participation in religious activities that would foster more appropriate attitudes towards spiritual matters and religious figures. Economic consequences for ridiculing clergy could include fines paid to support church activities, requirements to provide unpaid labour for church projects, and restrictions on business activities that might affect the offender's ability to earn a living until they demonstrated proper repentance and reformed behaviour. Social restrictions were sometimes imposed on those who mocked religious figures, including exclusion from certain community activities, limitations on participation in religious festivals and ceremonies, and reduced social standing that could affect marriage prospects, business relationships, and community support during times of need. Community service requirements often involved work that directly supported religious activities, or demonstrated proper respect for spiritual authority, such as maintaining church buildings, assisting with religious ceremonies, or providing services for other community members under the supervision of religious authorities. The prevention of inappropriate behaviour toward religious figures was addressed through regular religious education that emphasised the importance of showing proper respect for spiritual authority, understanding of the essential services that clergy provided, and recognition of the divine foundation of religious authority within Christian society. Long-term community benefits of maintaining proper respect for religious figures included continued access to essential spiritual services, preservation of religious authority that provided moral guidance and community leadership, and maintenance of social stability that depended on widely accepted religious and moral standards. Religious authorities regularly reminded community members that showing proper respect for clergy was not merely a matter of social courtesy, but a religious obligation that affected their spiritual welfare and their standing within the Christian community that provided essential support for all aspects of medieval life. Royal authority in medieval society was understood to derive from divine appointment, making royal proclamations and ceremonies sacred events that deserved the same reverence and respect accorded to religious activities. Kings and queens were viewed as God's representatives on earth, chosen to provide leadership, protection and justice for their subjects, and any disrespect shown toward royal authority was considered both treasonous and blasphemous. Royal proclamations served essential functions in medieval governance, providing official communication of laws, policies, and royal decisions that affected everyone's daily life and long-term welfare. These proclamations were often delivered with great ceremony and formality that emphasized their importance and authority, creating occasions when proper respect for royal authority was both expected and carefully observed. The ceremonial aspects of royal activities were designed to reinforce the dignity and authority of royal office, while creating opportunities for subjects to demonstrate their loyalty and respect for legitimate authority. These ceremonies included coronations, royal visits, official announcements, and various formal occasions that brought communities together in shared recognition of royal authority and common citizenship. Laughing during royal proclamations or ceremonies was interpreted as showing disrespect for royal authority and challenging the divine order that placed kings and queens in positions of leadership over their subjects. Such behaviour was considered treasonous because it undermined the foundation of political authority and could encourage others to question or resist legitimate governance. The consequences for showing disrespect during royal activities were severe and swift, reflecting the seriousness with which medieval authorities regarded challenges to royal authority. These consequences were designed to demonstrate the power of royal authority while deterring others from similar displays of disrespect or defiance. Legal penalties for disrespecting royal authority could include imprisonment, heavy fines, confiscation of property, and in extreme cases, exile or execution for those whose behaviour was deemed particularly threatening to royal authority or public order. These severe penalties reflected the understanding that political authority was essential for community survival and prosperity. Public punishment was often employed to address disrespect for royal authority, with offenders subjected to public humiliation that demonstrated the consequences of challenging legitimate governance, while providing visible education for other community members about the importance of maintaining proper respect for political authority. Social consequences for disrespecting royalty included loss of social standing, exclusion from community activities, restrictions on economic opportunities, and reduced access to legal protections that could affect every aspect of the offender's life and the welfare of their family members. Economic penalties were designed to cause significant financial hardship that would serve as lasting reminder of the importance of showing proper respect for royal authority, while also providing compensation to the crown for the offence caused by inappropriate behaviour during official royal activities. Community leaders understood that maintaining proper respect for royal authority was essential for preserving the political relationships that provided protection, legal order, and economic opportunities for their communities, making the enforcement of respectful behaviour during royal activities a matter of practical community welfare as well as political loyalty. Religious support for royal authority meant that showing disrespect for kings and queens was also considered a religious offence that could result in spiritual consequences, including exclusion from religious activities and loss of spiritual support from religious authorities who supported the divine nature of royal authority. The education of community members regarding proper behaviour during royal activities was considered essential for maintaining political stability and ensuring that communities could benefit from positive relationships with royal authority, making such education a responsibility of families, religious leaders, and community authorities. Long-term benefits of maintaining proper respect for royal authority included continued royal protection and support, access to royal justice and legal remedies, opportunities for economic advancement through royal favour, and maintenance of political stability that benefited all community members regardless of their individual social status. Medieval people understood natural disasters such as floods, droughts, earthquakes, and severe storms to be expressions of divine will, either as punishment for human sin or as tests of faith that provided opportunities for spiritual growth and community solidarity. Making light of these serious events was seen as showing dangerous disrespect for divine authority and failing to understand the spiritual lessons that such experiences were intended to provide. The theological interpretation of natural disasters was based on the understanding that all events in the natural world reflected divine purposes and that human suffering served important spiritual functions in God's plan for human salvation and moral development. This interpretation meant that appropriate responses to natural disasters included prayer, repentance, mutual assistance, and increased devotion rather than amusement or casual treatment. Community responses to natural disasters were organised around religious and moral principles that emphasised the importance of mutual support, charitable assistance for those who suffered losses, and collective spiritual activities designed to address the underlying spiritual causes that may have contributed to divine displeasure or testing. Laughing at natural disasters or treating them as amusing events was understood to demonstrate spiritual blindness and moral insensitivity that could bring additional divine punishment upon individuals and communities who failed to respond appropriately to divine signs and interventions in human affairs. The consequences for making light of natural disasters were designed to address both the spiritual harm caused by inappropriate attitudes and the practical damage to community morale and solidarity that could result from failure to maintain proper seriousness about divine intervention in human affairs. Religious penalties for inappropriate responses to natural disasters often included requirements for additional prayers, charitable donations to assist disaster victims, participation in community religious activities focused on repentance and spiritual renewal, and sometimes temporary exclusion from certain religious privileges until proper attitudes were demonstrated. Community service requirements frequently involved direct assistance to those who had suffered from natural disasters, allowing offenders to develop personal understanding of the serious consequences that such events had for community members, while providing practical help for those who needed assistance. Educational consequences might include instruction in proper theological understanding of natural disasters, study of religious teachings about divine providence and human responsibility, and participation in community discussions about appropriate responses to divine intervention in human affairs. Public acknowledgement of inappropriate behaviour was often required, with offenders expected to confess their lack of proper seriousness about divine matters and demonstrate renewed commitment to appropriate spiritual attitudes and community solidarity in the face of natural challenges. Economic penalties for making light of natural disasters often took the form of required donations to support disaster relief efforts, recognising that inappropriate attitudes toward community suffering should be addressed through practical assistance for those who were affected by serious events. Social consequences might include temporary exclusion from community activities and reduced social standing until the offender demonstrated proper understanding of the seriousness of natural disasters and appropriate commitment to community welfare and spiritual responsibility. The prevention of inappropriate responses to natural disasters was addressed through regular religious education that emphasized proper theological understanding of divine providence, community responsibility for mutual assistance during times of crisis, and the importance of maintaining appropriate spiritual attitudes toward all divine interventions in human affairs. Long-term community benefits of maintaining proper seriousness about natural disasters included stronger community solidarity during times of crisis, more effective mutual assistance networks, and development of spiritual resilience that helped communities cope with challenges while maintaining faith and social cohesion. Religious and community leaders regularly reminded community members that natural disasters provided opportunities for spiritual growth and community strengthening, and that responding with appropriate seriousness and mutual support would strengthen both individual faith and community bonds that were essential for long-term survival and prosperity. Funeral processions in medieval society were sacred ceremonies that served multiple important functions, including honouring the deceased, providing comfort for grieving families, demonstrating community solidarity, and offering opportunities for spiritual reflection on mortality and the afterlife. These solemn occasions required respectful behaviour from all community members who encountered them, as inappropriate conduct could cause additional pain for mourning families while showing disrespect for the sacred transition from earthly life to eternal judgment. The religious significance of funeral processions was rooted in Christian beliefs about death, judgment, and the afterlife, with these ceremonies representing crucial moments in the spiritual journey of souls departing from earthly existence to face divine judgment. Community participation in these sacred events was understood to be both an act of charity toward the deceased and their families, and an opportunity for spiritual reflection on mortality and eternal responsibility. Cultural traditions surrounding death and burial had developed over centuries of Christian practice and reflected deep community values about family loyalty, social solidarity, and spiritual responsibility that extended beyond individual lifetimes to encompass ongoing relationships between the living and the dead through prayer, memory, and charitable acts performed in honor of the deceased. Funeral processions provided visible demonstrations of community unity and shared values, with neighbours, friends, and even strangers showing respect for the deceased and support for grieving families through their participation in or respectful observation of these important ceremonies. This community solidarity was essential for maintaining social bonds and providing emotional support during times of loss and grief. Laughing or showing disrespect during funeral processions was considered particularly offensive, because it demonstrated callous indifference to human suffering and spiritual matters, while also causing additional pain for families who were already experiencing the difficult emotions associated with losing loved ones. Such behaviour was seen as revealing serious defects in character and moral understanding. The consequences for showing disrespect during funeral processions were designed to address both the immediate harm caused to grieving families and the broader damage to community values and social solidarity that resulted from inappropriate behaviour during sacred occasions that required universal respect and solemnity. Religious penalties for disrupting funeral processions often included requirements for prayers for the souls of the deceased, charitable donations to support funeral expenses or assist grieving families, and participation in religious activities focused on proper understanding of death, judgment, and Christian responsibilities toward the deceased and their survivors. Public penance was commonly required for those who showed disrespect during funeral processions, with offenders expected to acknowledge their inappropriate behaviour publicly and demonstrate proper reverence for the deceased and compassion for grieving families through formal apologies and gestures of respect and support. Community service requirements frequently involved assistance with funeral preparations, cemetery maintenance, or support for grieving families, allowing offenders to develop better understanding of the importance of these sacred occasions while providing practical help for community members during times of need. Social consequences for disrespecting funeral processions could include temporary exclusion from community gatherings, reduced social standing, and limitations on participation in important community events, until the offender demonstrated proper understanding of appropriate behaviour during sacred occasions. Economic penalties might include fines paid to support funeral expenses or charitable donations to benefit the families of the deceased, recognising that inappropriate behaviour during times of grief caused real harm that should be addressed through practical assistance for those who are affected. Educational requirements often involved instruction in proper behaviour during religious and ceremonial occasions. Theological study focused on Christian teachings about death and eternal responsibility, and participation in community discussions about the importance of maintaining respectful attitudes during sacred events. The prevention of inappropriate behaviour during funeral processions was addressed through family education that taught children about proper respect for the deceased and consideration for grieving families, religious instruction about Christian attitudes toward death and mourning, and community reinforcement of values that emphasize compassion and social solidarity. Long-term community benefits of maintaining proper respect during funeral processions included stronger family and community bonds, more effective support networks for those experiencing grief and loss, and development of shared values that emphasize compassion, respect, and mutual assistance during times of crisis and transition. Religious and community leaders regularly emphasized that funeral processions were sacred occasions that deserved universal respect, and that proper behaviour during these events reflected individual character and community values while providing essential support for families and friends who are coping with the difficult emotions associated with death and loss. Medieval communities regularly received visitors from distant places who brought different languages, customs, clothing styles, and cultural practices that might seem unusual or amusing to local residents who were unfamiliar with foreign ways of life. However, mocking these visitors or their customs was considered inappropriate behaviour that violated principles of hospitality, Christian charity, and practical diplomacy that were essential for maintaining peaceful relationships and beneficial trade connections. The principle of hospitality towards strangers was deeply rooted in both Christian teaching and practical necessity, as medieval communities depended on travellers for news from distant places, trade opportunities, and cultural exchange that enriched local life while providing essential goods and services that could not be produced locally. Treating foreign visitors with respect was therefore both a moral obligation and a practical necessity. Cultural differences between communities were understood to be natural results of different histories, environments, and traditions rather than signs of superiority or inferiority, and wise community leaders recognized that learning from foreign visitors could provide valuable knowledge and opportunities that would benefit their own communities in various ways. Trade relationships with foreign merchants and craftsmen were essential for medieval economic prosperity, as communities needed to import goods that they could not produce locally, while exporting their own products to distant markets. Maintaining good relationships with foreign traders required demonstrating respect for their customs and treating them with courtesy and fairness. Diplomatic considerations made respectful treatment of foreign visitors important for maintaining peaceful relationships between communities and regions, as inappropriate behaviour toward visitors could create conflicts that might lead to trade restrictions, political tensions, or even military conflicts that would harm everyone's welfare and security. The consequences for mocking foreign visitors were designed to address both the immediate offence caused to the visitors themselves and the broader damage to community reputation and relationships that could result from displays of prejudice and cultural insensitivity that reflected poorly on community values and leadership. Public apologies were often required for those who mocked foreign visitors, with offenders expected to acknowledge their inappropriate behaviour directly to the visitors they had offended and demonstrate proper respect for cultural differences through formal expressions of regret and promises of better behaviour in the future. Educational requirements might include learning about foreign customs and cultures, instruction in proper behaviour toward visitors and strangers, and participation in activities that promoted better understanding of cultural differences and the benefits that diversity could bring to community life. Economic penalties for mocking foreign visitors could include fines that compensated visitors for the offence they had experienced, requirements to provide free goods or services to demonstrate proper hospitality, and restrictions on participation in trade activities until proper attitudes toward foreign visitors were demonstrated. Community service requirements often involved assistance with hospitality arrangements for visitors, helping with translation and communication needs, or supporting trade activities that demonstrated the practical benefits of maintaining good relationships with foreign visitors and their home communities. Social consequences for mocking foreign visitors might include exclusion from trade activities, limitations on travel opportunities that depended on maintaining good relationships with foreign communities, and reduced social standing within the community until proper respect for cultural differences was demonstrated. Religious instruction about Christian obligations towards strangers and foreigners was often provided to address the spiritual aspects of cultural prejudice and help offenders understand that showing respect for all people, regardless of their origins or customs, was an essential element of Christian charity and moral development. The prevention of inappropriate behaviour toward foreign visitors was addressed through community education that emphasised the practical and moral benefits of cultural tolerance, family instruction about proper hospitality and respect for differences, and community leadership that modelled appropriate behaviour toward visitors and strangers. Long-term community benefits of maintaining respectful attitudes toward foreign visitors included continued access to trade opportunities, acquisition of new knowledge and skills from cultural exchange, development of positive reputation that attracted beneficial visitors and trade relationships, and strengthening of community values that emphasised tolerance and respect for diversity. Community leaders regularly reminded residents that their treatment of foreign visitors reflected on the entire community and could affect important relationships that provided economic opportunities, cultural enrichment, and peaceful coexistence with neighbouring regions and distant communities. Agricultural production formed the foundation of medieval economic life, with successful harvests determining whether communities would have adequate food supplies for survival through winter months and periods of scarcity. Food shortages and agricultural failures were serious crises that threatened community survival and required cooperative responses focused on conservation, mutual assistance, and practical solutions rather than humour or ridicule that could undermine community morale and solidarity. The causes of agricultural failures were often beyond human control, including weather conditions such as droughts, floods, early frosts and storms that could destroy crops despite careful planning and diligent work by farmers and agricultural workers. Understanding these natural limitations helped communities recognise that agricultural failures were misfortunes that required compassionate responses rather than blame or mockery. Food security was a constant concern for medieval communities, as even successful harvest years might be followed by poor growing conditions that created shortages and forced difficult decisions about rationing, conservation and distribution of limited food supplies. These challenges required community cooperation and mutual support rather than divisive behaviour that could weaken collective responses to crisis situations. The social impact of food shortages affected everyone in medieval communities, from wealthy landowners who faced reduced incomes to poor labourers who might face starvation if adequate relief measures were not implemented quickly and effectively. This shared vulnerability created common interests that made mockery of agricultural failures both insensitive and potentially dangerous for community survival. Economic consequences of agricultural failures extended far beyond immediate food shortages to include disrupted trade relationships, reduced economic activity, increased poverty and social instability, and potential for conflicts over limited resources that could threaten the peaceful coexistence that communities depended upon for their survival and prosperity. The consequences for ridiculing agricultural failures or food shortages were designed to address both the immediate harm caused to those who were suffering from these serious problems and the broader damage to community solidarity and cooperative spirit that was essential for surviving difficult periods and maintaining social stability during times of crisis. Community service requirements for those who mocked agricultural problems often involved direct participation in food relief efforts, agricultural work to help address shortages, and assistance with distribution of aid to those who were most seriously affected by food scarcity and agricultural difficulties. Public acknowledgement of inappropriate behaviour was commonly required, with offenders expected to confess their insensitivity to community suffering and demonstrate renewed commitment to community solidarity and mutual assistance during times of crisis and difficulty. Educational consequences might include instruction in agricultural practices and challenges, learning about the practical difficulties faced by farmers and food producers, and participation in community discussions about cooperative responses to food shortages and agricultural problems. Economic penalties for mocking food shortages often took the form of required donations to support food relief efforts, contributions of labour or resources to agricultural projects, and fines that were used to purchase food for distribution to those who were most seriously affected by shortages and scarcity. Religious consequences for showing insensitivity to community suffering included requirements for prayers for those affected by food shortages, charitable donations to support relief efforts, and participation in religious activities focused on Christian obligations to assist those in need and show compassion for human suffering. Social restrictions might be imposed on those who mocked agricultural failures, including exclusion from community celebrations and festivals, reduced social standing, and limitations on participation in community decision-making until proper understanding of community solidarity was demonstrated. The prevention of inappropriate responses to agricultural problems was addressed through community education that emphasised the shared vulnerability that all community members faced regarding food security, family instruction about compassion and mutual assistance during times of crisis, and religious teaching about Christian obligations to support those in need. Long-term community benefits of maintaining appropriate seriousness about agricultural challenges included stronger cooperation during times of crisis, more effective mutual assistance networks, and development of resilience and solidarity that helped communities survive difficult periods while maintaining social cohesion and shared commitment to collective welfare. Community leaders regularly reminded residents that agricultural success and food security depended on cooperative efforts and mutual support, and that maintaining appropriate attitudes toward these essential concerns was crucial for community survival and prosperity during both good times and periods of difficulty and challenge. Military conflicts and warfare were constant realities of medieval life, with communities depending on armed forces for protection against external enemies, defense of territorial boundaries, and maintenance of political relationships that ensured peace and security. Military defeats represented serious threats to community survival and prosperity, making inappropriate humour about such losses both insensitive to those who had suffered and potentially dangerous for community morale and defensive preparedness. The human cost of military defeats included not only soldiers who were killed or wounded in combat, but also families who lost providers, communities that faced increased vulnerability to future attacks, and economic disruption that affected everyone's welfare and security. These serious consequences made military losses occasions for mourning and reflection, rather than amusement or casual treatment. Strategic implications of military defeats often extended far beyond immediate losses to include weakened defensive positions, reduced political influence, damaged alliances, and increased vulnerability to future attacks that could threaten community survival and independence. Understanding these broader consequences helped communities recognize the serious nature of military setbacks. Community responses to military defeats typically involved mourning for the fallen, support for wounded veterans and bereaved families, assessment of defensive needs and capabilities, and planning for improved military preparedness that would provide better protection against future threats and challenges. Morale considerations made inappropriate humour about military defeats particularly damaging, as communities needed to maintain confidence in their defensive capabilities and commitment to mutual protection rather than allowing discouragement or cynicism to undermine their willingness to resist threats and defend their homes and families. The consequences for making light of military defeats were designed to address both the immediate offence caused to veterans and bereaved families and the broader damage to community morale and military preparedness that could result from inappropriate attitudes towards serious defensive concerns. Military service requirements were often imposed on those who mocked military defeats, allowing offenders to develop personal understanding of the challenges and dangers faced by soldiers while contributing to community defensive capabilities through their own service and sacrifice. Support obligations for veterans and military families might be required, with offenders expected to provide assistance to those who had suffered losses in military service, demonstrating proper appreciation for the sacrifices made by community defenders and their families. Public acknowledgement of inappropriate behaviour was commonly required, with offenders expected to apologise directly to veterans and military families for their insensitivity, while demonstrating renewed respect for military service and sacrifice through formal expressions of support and gratitude. Educational requirements often included instruction in military history and strategy, learning about the challenges faced by armed forces, and participation in community discussions about defensive needs and the importance of maintaining strong military capabilities for community protection and security. Economic penalties for mocking military defeats might include fines used to support veterans and military families, contributions to military equipment and supplies, and requirements to provide resources that would strengthen community defensive capabilities and preparedness. Community service related to military support could include maintenance of defensive facilities, assistance with military training and preparation, and work projects that contributed to community security and defensive readiness, while demonstrating proper commitment to collective defense. Religious consequences for showing disrespect for military sacrifice often included prayers for fallen soldiers and their families, charitable donations to support veterans and bereaved families, and participation in religious ceremonies that honoured military service and sacrifice, while seeking divine protection for community defenders. Social restrictions might be imposed on those who mocked military defeats, including exclusion from community decision-making related to defence and security, reduced social standing, and limitations on participation in community activities until proper respect for military service was demonstrated. The prevention of inappropriate responses to military defeats was addressed through community education that emphasised the importance of military service and sacrifice, family instruction about respect for veterans and defensive needs, and regular commemoration of military service that reinforced community appreciation for those who provided protection. Long-term community benefits of maintaining proper respect for military service included stronger community support for defensive efforts, better recruitment and retention of military personnel, and development of military traditions and esprit de corps that enhanced defensive capabilities and community security. Traditional crafts and skilled trades formed the economic foundation of medieval communities, providing essential goods and services that everyone depended upon for their daily survival and comfort. These skills had been developed over generations of practice and represented accumulated knowledge and expertise that was crucial for community prosperity and self-sufficiency, making mockery of traditional crafts both economically damaging and culturally destructive. Master craftsmen and skilled artisans held important positions within medieval communities, not only because of their economic contributions, but also because they served as teachers and preservers of essential knowledge that had to be passed down to new generations to ensure community survival and continued prosperity. Their skills and expertise were community assets that deserved respect and protection. The training systems that supported traditional crafts involved years of apprenticeship and gradual skill development that represented significant investments of time and resources by both masters and apprentices. This training was essential for maintaining craft quality and ensuring that essential skills would be available to meet community needs in the future. Economic relationships within craft communities were based on mutual respect and recognition of skill levels that determined wages, working conditions, and advancement opportunities. Mockery of traditional crafts could disrupt these relationships and undermine the cooperative spirit that was essential for maintaining productive craft workshops and training new artisans. Quality standards for traditional crafts were maintained through guild systems and informal peer pressure that ensured products met community needs and expectations. These standards depended on maintaining respect for craft expertise and traditional methods that had proven effective over long periods of experience and practice. The consequences for showing disrespect for traditional crafts were designed to address both the immediate offence caused to skilled artisans and the broader damage to craft traditions and economic relationships that could result from undermining respect for essential skills and knowledge. Apprenticeship requirements were sometimes imposed on those who mocked traditional crafts, allowing offenders to develop personal understanding of the skill and dedication required for craft mastery, while contributing to the preservation and transmission of essential knowledge and techniques. Support obligations for craft communities might include assistance with workshop maintenance, help with training activities, and contributions of materials or resources that supported craft production, and skill development within the community. Public acknowledgement of the value and importance of traditional crafts was often required, with offenders expected to demonstrate renewed respect for skilled artisans and their contributions to community welfare through formal expressions of appreciation and support. Educational requirements could include instruction in craft techniques and history, learning about the economic importance of skilled trades, and participation in community discussions about the role of traditional crafts in maintaining community prosperity and self-sufficiency. Economic penalties for mocking traditional crafts might include fines that supported craft guilds and training programs, requirements to purchase goods from local artisans, and contributions to workshops and equipment that enhanced craft production capabilities. Community service related to craft support often involved assistance with workshops and training activities, maintenance of craft facilities and equipment, and work projects that demonstrated appreciation for skilled trades while contributing to their continued prosperity and development. Religious aspects of craft respect were sometimes addressed through recognition that skilled craftsmanship was a gift from God that deserved appreciation and proper use, and that showing disrespect for divine gifts was inappropriate behaviour that reflected poor spiritual understanding. Social consequences for disrespecting traditional crafts might include exclusion from craft-related activities and celebrations, reduced access to goods and services provided by offended artisans, and limitations on participation in economic activities until proper respect for skilled trades was demonstrated. The prevention of inappropriate attitudes toward traditional crafts was addressed through community education that emphasized the importance of skilled trades for community welfare, family instruction about respect for honest work and expertise, and regular recognition of craft contributions to community prosperity. Long-term community benefits of maintaining proper respect for traditional crafts included continued availability of essential goods and services, preservation of important skills and knowledge, stronger economic relationships within craft communities, and development of craft traditions that enhanced community reputation and prosperity. community leaders regularly emphasized that traditional crafts and skilled trades were essential foundations of community prosperity, and that maintaining respect for artisans and their skills was crucial for preserving the economic relationships and knowledge systems that supported everyone's welfare and security. Marriage arrangements in medieval society served important functions beyond personal relationships, creating family alliances, economic partnerships, and social connections that strengthened community bonds while providing security and support for individuals throughout their lives. These arrangements were typically made by families based on practical considerations of economic compatibility, social appropriateness, and long-term benefits for all parties involved. Family customs surrounding marriage and other important life events had developed over generations of experience and reflected community values about proper relationships, social responsibility, and mutual support that were essential for maintaining stable families and strong communities. These customs provided structure and guidance for important life decisions while preserving cultural traditions. The economic aspects of marriage arrangements included considerations of property, inheritance, working partnerships, and financial security that affected not only the couple being married, but also their extended families and community relationships. These practical concerns were recognized as legitimate factors in marriage decisions that deserved serious consideration rather than mockery or dismissal. Social functions of marriage customs included reinforcing family relationships, creating new social connections, demonstrating community values, and providing opportunities for celebration and community gathering that strengthened social bonds while marking important life transitions, with appropriate ceremony and recognition. Community involvement in marriage arrangements reflected the understanding that family relationships affected everyone's welfare, and that community members had legitimate interests in ensuring that marriages were appropriate and likely to contribute to social stability and family prosperity, rather than creating problems or conflicts. The consequences for ridiculing marriage arrangements and family customs were designed to address both the immediate offence caused to families involved and the broader damage to social traditions and community values that could result from undermining respect for important cultural practices and family relationships. Family service requirements were often imposed on those who mocked marriage customs, allowing offenders to develop better understanding of family responsibilities and the practical importance of marriage arrangements while contributing to family welfare and community social stability. Educational obligations might include instruction in proper social behaviour, learning about the functions and importance of family customs, and participation in community discussions about marriage, family relationships, and social responsibilities that helped maintain community harmony. Public acknowledgement of inappropriate behaviour was commonly required, with offenders expected to apologise to affected families and demonstrate renewed respect for marriage customs and family traditions through formal expressions of support and proper behaviour. Community service related to family support could include assistance with wedding preparations, help with family celebrations, and contributions to activities that strengthened family relationships and community social bonds while demonstrating proper appreciation for important customs and traditions. Economic penalties for mocking family customs might include fines that supported family celebrations and community social activities, contributions to marriage and family support funds, and requirements to provide goods or services that assisted families with important life events and ceremonies. Social restrictions could be imposed on those who ridiculed marriage arrangements, including exclusion from family celebrations and social events, reduced social standing within the community, and limitations on participation in community social activities until proper respect for family customs was demonstrated. Religious aspects of marriage and family customs were often addressed through instruction about Christian teachings regarding marriage and family relationships, recognition that family bonds were blessed by God, and understanding that showing respect for marriage was part of proper religious behaviour. Mediation and counselling might be provided to help offenders understand the importance of family relationships and social customs, develop better social skills and attitudes, and learn to participate constructively in community social life, rather than disrupting important traditions and relationships. The prevention of inappropriate attitudes toward marriage and family customs was addressed through family education that taught proper respect for social traditions, community instruction about the importance of family relationships, and regular celebration of marriage and family customs that reinforced their value and significance. Long-term community benefits of maintaining respect for marriage and family customs included stronger family relationships, more stable social bonds, better support systems for individuals and families, and preservation of cultural traditions that contributed to community identity and social cohesion. Community leaders regularly reminded residents that marriage and family customs served important social functions, and that maintaining respect for these traditions was essential for preserving the family relationships and social bonds that provided security and support for all community members. Education and learning were precious opportunities in medieval society, available to relatively few people, and representing significant investments of time and resources that communities made to preserve and transmit essential knowledge. Educational efforts included not only formal schooling for those fortunate enough to receive it, but also apprenticeship training, religious instruction, and informal learning that helped individuals develop skills and knowledge that benefited both themselves and their communities. The scarcity of educational opportunities made them particularly valuable, as most medieval people had limited access to formal learning due to economic constraints, social restrictions, and the practical demands of daily survival that required immediate contributions to family and community welfare, rather than time spent in study and contemplation. Religious education was often the primary form of formal learning available to medieval people, providing not only spiritual instruction, but also basic literacy, moral guidance, and cultural knowledge that was essential for full participation in community life and Christian society. This religious learning was considered particularly important for spiritual development and social integration. Practical education through apprenticeships and informal training provided essential skills that communities needed for economic prosperity and self-sufficiency, including crafts, trades, agricultural techniques, and various other skills that were necessary for producing goods and services that everyone depended upon for their daily welfare. The preservation of knowledge was a crucial function of educational efforts, as learned individuals served as repositories of important information about history, law, medicine, agriculture, and other subjects that might be lost if not carefully maintained and transmitted to new generations through teaching and study. The consequences for mocking educational efforts were designed to address both the immediate discouragement caused to those who were pursuing learning and the broader damage to community attitudes toward education that could result from undermining respect for knowledge and intellectual development. Educational service requirements were often imposed on those who ridiculed learning, allowing offenders to develop personal appreciation for the challenges and benefits of education, while contributing to educational efforts through assistance with teaching, learning support, and educational activities. Support obligations for educational institutions and activities might include assistance with schools and libraries, help with educational materials and supplies, and contributions of time or resources that supported learning opportunities for community members who sought to develop their knowledge and skills. Public acknowledgement of the value and importance of education was commonly required, with offenders expected to demonstrate renewed respect for learning and educational efforts through formal expressions of support and practical contributions to educational activities and institutions. Community service related to education often involved assistance with teaching activities, maintenance of educational facilities, and support for learning programs that demonstrated proper appreciation for education while contributing to community intellectual development and knowledge preservation. Economic penalties for mocking educational efforts might include fines that supported schools and educational programs, requirements to provide materials and resources for learning activities, and contributions to scholarship funds that helped other community members pursue educational opportunities. Religious aspects of educational respect were addressed through recognition that learning and knowledge were gifts from God that deserved proper appreciation and use, and that showing disrespect for educational efforts was inappropriate behaviour that failed to recognise divine blessings and opportunities. Social consequences for ridiculing education could include exclusion from intellectual and cultural activities, reduced access to educational opportunities, and limitations on participation in community discussions and decision-making that required knowledge and informed judgment. Mentorship obligations might be imposed on those who mocked learning, requiring them to work with students and learners to develop better understanding of educational challenges and benefits, while providing practical support for others who were pursuing knowledge and skill development. The prevention of inappropriate attitudes toward education was addressed through community recognition of educational achievements, family instruction about the value of learning and regular celebration of intellectual accomplishments that reinforced the importance of education for individual and community development. Long-term community benefits of maintaining respect for educational efforts included better informed citizens, preservation of important knowledge and skills, stronger intellectual and cultural life, and development of human resources that enhanced community prosperity and advancement. Educational leaders and community authorities regularly emphasized that learning and knowledge were essential for community prosperity and individual development, and that maintaining respect for educational efforts was crucial for preserving and advancing the intellectual foundations that supported community progress and cultural achievement. Legal proceedings and the administration of justice were fundamental pillars of medieval community life, providing essential mechanisms for resolving disputes, maintaining social order, and protecting individual rights within established legal frameworks that had developed over centuries of social evolution. These proceedings represented serious efforts to ensure fairness and protect community welfare through careful application of law and custom. The solemnity of legal proceedings reflected the serious nature of the matters being addressed, including disputes over property, contracts, criminal behavior, and other issues that affected individual welfare and community stability. These proceedings required careful attention to evidence, proper procedure, and fair consideration of all parties involved in legal disputes. Justice systems in medieval communities were designed to provide orderly resolution of conflicts that might otherwise lead to violence, social disruption, and breakdown of community relationships. The effectiveness of these systems depended on maintaining respect for legal authority and proper behavior during legal proceedings that demonstrated community commitment to lawful resolution of disputes. Legal authorities, including judges, magistrates, and other officials, held positions of significant responsibility within medieval communities, as their decisions affected individual lives and community welfare while establishing precedents that would influence future legal proceedings and social relationships. The educational functions of legal proceedings included demonstrating proper legal procedures, illustrating the consequences of various behaviors, and reinforcing community values and standards through visible application of law and justice that helped maintain social order and individual responsibility. The consequences for showing amusement during legal proceedings were designed to address both the immediate disruption caused to serious legal business and the broader damage to legal authority and community respect for justice that could result from inappropriate behavior during important legal activities. Legal service requirements were often imposed on those who disrupted legal proceedings, allowing offenders to develop better understanding of legal processes and responsibilities, while contributing to the administration of justice through assistance with legal activities and court operations. Respect obligations might include formal apologies to legal authorities and parties involved in disrupted proceedings, demonstration of proper courtroom behavior, and acknowledgement of the importance of legal proceedings for community welfare and individual protection. Educational requirements often included instruction in legal procedures and principles, learning about the importance of justice systems, and participation in community discussions about law, order, and individual responsibilities within legal frameworks that maintained community stability. Public acknowledgement of inappropriate behavior was commonly required, with offenders expected to confess their disrespect for legal authority and demonstrate renewed commitment to proper legal behavior through formal expressions of respect and support for justice systems. Community service related to legal support could include assistance with court facilities and operations, help with legal research and documentation, and contributions to activities that supported legal proceedings and justice administration while demonstrating proper respect for legal authority. Economic penalties for disrupting legal proceedings might include fines that supported court operations and legal activities, contributions to legal aid funds that helped community members access justice, and payments that compensated for disruption and delay caused by inappropriate behavior. Social consequences for showing disrespect for legal proceedings could include exclusion from legal activities and proceedings, reduced access to legal protections and services, and limitations on participation in community decision-making until proper respect for legal authority was demonstrated. Supervision and monitoring might be imposed on those who disrupted legal proceedings, ensuring that their future behavior during legal activities was appropriate and respectful, while providing opportunities for them to demonstrate improved understanding of legal responsibilities and proper courtroom conduct. The prevention of inappropriate behaviour during legal proceedings was addressed through community education about legal procedures and responsibilities, family instruction about respect for legal authority, and regular reinforcement of values that emphasised the importance of justice and lawful behaviour. Long-term community benefits of maintaining proper respect for legal proceedings included more effective justice systems, stronger rule of law, better protection for individual rights, and development of legal traditions that enhanced community stability and fair resolution of disputes. Legal authorities and community leaders regularly emphasized that legal proceedings were essential for community welfare and individual protection, and that maintaining proper respect for justice systems was crucial for preserving the legal foundations that supported community peace, order, and fair treatment for all residents. As we reach the end of our quiet journey through the measured world of medieval social expectations, we can see how the regulation of laughter and humour served important functions in maintaining the stable, ordered communities that medieval people depended upon for their survival and prosperity. These were not arbitrary restrictions imposed by cruel authorities, but rather practical guidelines that helped preserve the delicate social relationships and cultural traditions that held communities together during challenging times. The 15 situations we've explored tonight demonstrate how medieval society understood laughter to be a powerful social force that could either strengthen community bonds or disrupt the careful balance of relationships that everyone depended upon for security and welfare. The consequences for inappropriate humour were designed not simply to punish, but to educate and guide community members toward behaviour that supported collective well-being and social harmony. Medieval communities recognised that humour and amusement had their proper place and time, but also understood that certain occasions, subjects, and circumstances required serious attitudes and respectful behaviour that demonstrated appropriate understanding of social responsibilities and community values. This balance between enjoyment and responsibility reflected practical wisdom about human nature and social dynamics. The social structures that governed medieval life may seem restrictive by modern standards, but they provided stability, security, and mutual support that helped communities survive difficulties and challenges that might have overwhelmed less organised societies. These structures depended on shared understanding of proper behaviour and mutual commitment to collective welfare. The consequences for inappropriate laughter, while sometimes severe, were typically proportionate to the harm caused, and were designed to restore social harmony rather than simply inflict punishment. Most communities preferred education and correction to harsh penalties, recognising that helping people understand proper behaviour was more effective than simply punishing inappropriate conduct. Religious and moral principles underlying these social expectations emphasised Christian values of respect, charity, compassion, and humility that were considered essential for spiritual development and social cooperation. These principles provided meaningful foundations for community life that extended beyond mere social convenience to encompass deeper purposes and shared beliefs. The preservation of these social guidelines through community education, family instruction, and cultural tradition ensured that each new generation understood their responsibilities and opportunities within established social frameworks while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances and new challenges. Economic and practical considerations also supported these social expectations, as communities understood that maintaining respectful relationships, preserving essential traditions, and supporting cooperative behaviour were crucial for prosperity and survival in environments where mutual assistance was often the difference between success and failure. The long-term benefits of maintaining these careful social guidelines included stronger community bonds, more effective mutual support systems, preservation of important cultural knowledge and traditions, and development of social resilience that helped communities weather various crises and challenges while maintaining their essential character and values. Modern readers might find these medieval restrictions on humour overly strict or unnecessarily limiting, but it's important to remember that medieval communities faced different challenges and operated within different social and economic constraints that made careful attention to social harmony a practical necessity rather than merely a cultural preference. The wisdom embedded in these traditional approaches to social behaviour continues to offer insights into the importance of mutual respect, appropriate behaviour in various social contexts, and the delicate balance between individual expression and community welfare that all societies must navigate in their own ways. Understanding how medieval communities managed these challenges through established customs and clear expectations provides perspective on our own social challenges, and reminds us that successful communities have always required some balance between individual freedom and collective responsibility, personal expression and social harmony. The gentle but firm social order that characterized medieval community life was built on generations of experience with what worked to maintain peace, prosperity, and mutual support among people who depended on each other for survival and welfare in often difficult and uncertain circumstances. As we conclude tonight's exploration of medieval social expectations, we can appreciate how these careful guidelines for appropriate behaviour reflected deep wisdom about human nature and social dynamics, even as we recognise that different times and circumstances require different approaches to the eternal challenge of balancing individual desires with community needs. So let's rest tonight with appreciation for the thoughtful social arrangements that helped our medieval ancestors build stable, supportive communities where everyone understood their place and responsibilities, and where careful attention to appropriate behaviour helped maintain the peaceful coexistence that made community life possible and beneficial for all who participated in it, with proper understanding and genuine commitment to collective welfare. The regulation of laughter and humour in medieval society was not simply a matter of occasional restrictions during special events, but rather formed part of the daily fabric of social interaction that governed how people related to each other in all aspects of community life. These behavioural expectations were woven into the ordinary routines of work, family relationships, religious observance, and social interaction that filled medieval people's days with purposeful activity and meaningful connections. Morning routines in medieval communities began with religious observances that set the tone for appropriate behaviour throughout the day, as people gathered for prayers and spiritual reflection that reminded them of their responsibilities to God, their families, and their communities. These quiet moments of contemplation helped establish the serious, respectful attitudes that would guide their interactions with others during the busy activities that filled their working days. Workplace behaviour was governed by established customs and traditions that emphasised respect for authority, cooperation with fellow workers, and dedication to producing quality goods and services that benefited the entire community. Inappropriate humour or disruptive behaviour during work activities could interfere with productivity and safety, while undermining the cooperative relationships that made effective work possible. Family interactions followed patterns of respect and hierarchy that reflected broader social values while providing structure and guidance for daily relationships between parents and children, husbands and wives, and extended family members who shared homes and resources. These family patterns taught children appropriate social behaviour while maintaining harmony in close living situations that required constant cooperation and mutual consideration. Market and trading activities brought people together from different parts of the community, and sometimes from distant places, creating opportunities for social interaction that required careful attention to appropriate behaviour that would maintain good relationships and support beneficial economic exchanges. Proper conduct during these activities helped build trust and reputation that were essential for long-term economic success. Social gatherings and community celebrations provided opportunities for enjoyment and relaxation that were carefully balanced with maintaining appropriate behaviour that reflected community values and respected the various social relationships that participants brought to these events. These gatherings allowed for appropriate humour and entertainment, while avoiding behaviours that might cause offence or disrupt social harmony. Evening routines typically concluded with family prayers and reflection that helped people consider their behaviour during the day and prepare mentally and spiritually for the challenges and opportunities that the following day might bring. This daily cycle of reflection and preparation helped reinforce appropriate behavioural patterns while providing opportunities for personal growth and spiritual development. Seasonal variations in community activities brought different types of social interaction and behavioural expectations, as agricultural cycles, religious festivals, and weather patterns created varying demands for cooperation, celebration, and mutual assistance that required flexible adaptation of behavioural guidelines while maintaining consistent underlying values and principles. Training and education in appropriate behaviour began early in childhood and continued throughout life as people encountered new situations and responsibilities that required understanding of proper conduct in different circumstances. This ongoing education helped ensure that behavioural expectations were understood and followed, while allowing for adaptation to changing social conditions and individual development. Community reinforcement of behavioural expectations occurred through various informal mechanisms, including social approval for appropriate behaviour, gentle correction of minor infractions, and community support for those who demonstrated consistent commitment to proper conduct that contributed to social harmony and collective welfare. The integration of behavioural expectations with practical daily activities meant that appropriate conduct was not an additional burden imposed on community members, but rather a natural part of effective participation in community life that made daily activities more pleasant and productive for everyone involved. Medieval communities understood that maintaining appropriate social behaviour, including proper regulation of humour and laughter, had important economic implications that affected everyone's prosperity and welfare. Peaceful, orderly communities were more attractive to traders, craftsmen, and other economic actors who contributed to local prosperity, while communities known for social disorder and inappropriate behaviour might find themselves isolated from beneficial economic relationships. Trade relationships depended heavily on trust and reputation that could be damaged by inappropriate behaviour that suggested a community lacked proper social control and reliable business practices. Merchants and traders preferred to conduct business in communities where they could expect respectful treatment and reliable adherence to agreements and customs that protected their interests and investments. Craft production and skilled labour were enhanced by maintaining peaceful working environments where artisans could focus on their work without disruption from social conflicts or inappropriate behaviour that interfered with the concentration and cooperation that quality production required. Communities that maintained good social order attracted skilled workers and developed reputations for producing reliable goods and services. Agricultural productivity benefited from social harmony that enabled effective cooperation during planting, harvesting, and other activities that required coordinated effort from many community members. Inappropriate behaviour and social conflicts could disrupt these essential activities and reduce agricultural output that everyone depended upon for survival and prosperity. Property rights and legal agreements were more secure in communities that maintained respect for authority and proper legal procedures, encouraging investment and economic development that created opportunities for prosperity and advancement. Communities known for social disorder and disrespect for authority were less attractive for long-term economic investment and development. Labour relationships between employers and workers were more stable and productive in communities that maintained appropriate social hierarchies and behavioural expectations that prevented conflicts and misunderstandings while encouraging mutual respect and cooperation that benefited both workers and employers. Credit and financial relationships depended on trust and reputation that were enhanced by maintaining community standards of honest dealing and appropriate behaviour that demonstrated reliability and integrity in business relationships. Communities with strong social order found it easier to develop beneficial financial relationships that supported economic growth. Innovation and improvement in economic activities were more likely to occur in stable communities, where people felt secure enough to invest time and resources in developing new techniques and approaches that might benefit everyone over the long term. Social disorder and uncertainty discouraged such innovation and long-term thinking. Market development and commercial growth were supported by maintaining community reputations for fair dealing, appropriate behaviour, and reliable business practices that attracted outside investment and encouraged expansion of economic activities that created jobs and opportunities for local residents. Resource management and conservation were enhanced by social cooperation that enabled communities to make collective decisions about land use, water rights, and other shared resources that required coordination and mutual agreement to use effectively and sustainably for long-term community benefit. Infrastructure development, including roads, bridges, public buildings, and other facilities that supported economic activity, was more likely to occur in communities that could cooperate effectively and maintain social order that enabled successful completion of complex projects requiring sustained effort from many participants. Economic planning and adaptation to changing conditions were more effective in communities that maintained good communication and cooperation among residents who could work together to identify challenges and opportunities while developing appropriate responses that protected and enhanced community prosperity. Medieval society understood that appropriate behaviour, including proper regulation of laughter and humour, had important spiritual implications that affected not only individual souls, but also the collective spiritual welfare of entire communities. The integration of religious and social values meant that maintaining proper behaviour was seen as both a practical necessity for community harmony and a spiritual obligation that affected people's relationships with God and their eternal salvation. Religious teachings emphasised that proper behaviour toward others was an essential expression of Christian faith that demonstrated love for God through respectful treatment of fellow human beings who were understood to be created in God's image and deserving of appropriate respect and consideration. Inappropriate behaviour, including disrespectful humour, was therefore seen as a spiritual failing that could endanger one's soul. Community spiritual welfare was understood to depend on the collective behaviour of all residents, as the actions of individuals could affect God's favour toward the entire community and influence whether communities receive divine protection and blessing or face divine displeasure and punishment through natural disasters, military defeats, or other misfortunes. Prayer and worship activities that were central to medieval religious life required appropriate attitudes and behaviour that created sacred atmospheres where meaningful spiritual experience could occur. Inappropriate humour or disruptive behaviour during religious activities was seen as particularly serious because it interfered with the most important activities that communities engaged in for their spiritual welfare. Moral education that communities provided for children and adults emphasised that proper behaviour was not merely a matter of social convenience, but reflected deeper spiritual truths about human nature, divine expectations, and the purpose of human life within God's creation. This education helped people understand why appropriate behaviour was important for their spiritual development. Charitable activities and mutual assistance that were central to Christian community life required attitudes of respect and compassion that would be undermined by inappropriate humour or callous treatment of others' difficulties and sufferings. Maintaining proper behaviour helped preserve the spiritual attitudes that made effective charity and mutual assistance possible. Forgiveness and reconciliation processes that helped communities heal from conflicts and restore damaged relationships depended on maintaining attitudes of respect and humility that made genuine repentance and forgiveness possible. Inappropriate humour could interfere with these essential spiritual processes that maintained community harmony. Spiritual guidance provided by religious leaders was more effective in communities where appropriate behaviour created atmospheres of respect and reverence that enabled people to receive and benefit from religious instruction and pastoral care that was essential for spiritual development and community spiritual welfare. Seasonal religious observances, including festivals, fasting periods, and other special times that marked important events in the Christian calendar, required appropriate behaviour that demonstrated proper understanding of their spiritual significance and contributed to their effectiveness in strengthening individual and community faith. Personal spiritual development through prayer, meditation, and religious study was enhanced by maintaining appropriate behaviour that created internal and external conditions conducive to spiritual growth and understanding that benefited both individuals and the communities they were part of. Divine protection and blessing that communities sought through proper religious observance were understood to depend partly on maintaining community standards of behaviour that demonstrated collective commitment to Christian values and deserved divine favour and support. Preparation for eternal judgment that was a central concern of medieval Christianity required developing appropriate attitudes and behaviours during earthly life that would be acceptable to God and contribute to eternal salvation rather than eternal punishment that inappropriate behaviour and attitudes might bring. Medieval communities developed sophisticated methods for addressing conflicts and maintaining social harmony that emphasized restoration of proper relationships rather than mere punishment of inappropriate behavior. These peaceful resolution techniques were essential for maintaining community stability while providing opportunities for learning and growth that strengthened social bonds and improved individual behavior. Mediation processes brought together disputants with respected community members who could help identify sources of conflict and develop solutions that addressed underlying problems while restoring appropriate relationships between the parties involved. These processes emphasized understanding and cooperation rather than victory and defeat that might leave lasting resentments. Confession and acknowledgement procedures provided opportunities for those who had behaved inappropriately to recognize their mistakes and demonstrate genuine regret that made forgiveness and restoration possible. These procedures were designed to preserve dignity while ensuring that harmful behavior was addressed and corrected effectively. Restitution requirements that addressed harm caused by inappropriate behavior emphasize practical repair of damage, while providing opportunities for offenders to demonstrate their commitment to proper behavior through constructive actions that benefited those they had harmed and the broader community. Community education that resulted from addressing behavioral problems helped prevent similar issues in the future, while strengthening shared understanding of appropriate behavior and the reasons why such behavior was important for community welfare and individual development. Supervision and support systems provided ongoing assistance for those who had difficulty maintaining appropriate behavior, helping them develop better social skills and self-control, while protecting community welfare and providing opportunities for continued participation in community life. Gradual reintegration processes helped those who had been excluded from community activities because of inappropriate behavior to rebuild relationships and demonstrate their commitment to proper conduct, while ensuring that their return to full community participation was safe and beneficial for everyone involved. Family and peer involvement in resolution processes helped ensure that behavioral problems were addressed within broader social contexts that could provide ongoing support and accountability, while strengthening the relationships that were essential for maintaining appropriate behavior over time. Religious counseling and spiritual guidance helped address the underlying attitudes and values that contributed to inappropriate behavior, while providing spiritual resources that could support lasting behavioral change and personal growth that benefited both individuals and communities. Preventive measures that addressed conditions that might contribute to behavioral problems helped communities maintain social harmony by addressing sources of stress, conflict, and misunderstanding before they led to inappropriate behavior that required more serious intervention and correction. Follow-up and monitoring activities ensured that behavioral improvements were sustained over time, while providing opportunities for continued support and guidance that helped individuals maintain appropriate behavior and continue their positive contributions to community life. Community celebration of successful resolution and behavioral improvement helped reinforce positive changes, while demonstrating community commitment to forgiveness and restoration that encouraged others to address their own behavioral problems and seek assistance when needed. Documentation and learning from resolution processes helped communities improve their methods for maintaining social harmony, while preserving knowledge about effective techniques that could be used to address similar problems in the future. The maintenance of appropriate social behavior, including proper regulation of humor and laughter, formed part of the complex architecture of trust that held medieval communities together and enabled the cooperation and mutual support that everyone depended upon for survival and prosperity. This trust was built through countless daily interactions that demonstrated reliability, respect, and commitment to shared values and mutual welfare. Reputation systems that developed naturally within small communities provided ongoing assessment of individual trustworthiness based on consistent patterns of behavior over time. These systems helped people make informed decisions about whom to trust with important responsibilities, while providing incentives for maintaining appropriate behavior that supported positive reputations. Social networks that connected families, neighbours, and working relationships created webs of mutual obligation and support that were strengthened by appropriate behavior and could be damaged by inappropriate conduct that violated the trust and respect that these networks depended upon for their effectiveness. Economic relationships, including trade partnerships, employment arrangements, and financial agreements, were built on foundations of trust that required consistent demonstration of honesty, reliability, and appropriate behavior that showed respect for agreements and consideration for others' legitimate interests and welfare. Information sharing that was essential for community decision-making and coordination depended on trust in the accuracy and honesty of those who provided information, creating incentives for truthful communication and appropriate behavior that supported effective community governance and collective action. Conflict resolution mechanisms worked effectively only when community members trusted that they would be treated fairly and that resolution processes would address their legitimate concerns while maintaining appropriate standards of behavior and respect for all parties involved in disputes and disagreements. Leadership legitimacy depended partly on maintaining community trust through consistent demonstration of appropriate behaviour, fair treatment of community members, and commitment to community welfare that showed respect for the responsibilities and authority that leadership positions entailed. Mutual assistance systems that provided essential support during times of crisis or need were built on foundations of trust that individuals would provide help when they were able and would use assistance appropriately when they received it, creating networks of reciprocal support that strengthened community resilience. Cultural transmission that passed down important knowledge, values, and traditions from older to younger generations required trust in the wisdom and integrity of those who provided instruction and guidance, creating incentives for maintaining appropriate behaviour that demonstrated worthiness of respect and attention. Innovation and improvement in community practices were more likely to be accepted and adopted when they came from individuals who had established trust through consistent appropriate behaviour that demonstrated their commitment to community welfare and their understanding of community needs and values. Legal and judicial systems functioned effectively only when community members trusted that they would receive fair treatment, and that legal authorities would maintain appropriate standards of behaviour while upholding justice and protecting individual rights within established legal frameworks. Social cohesion that enabled communities to work together effectively during times of challenge or opportunity was built on foundations of mutual trust that were strengthened by appropriate behaviour and shared commitment to community values and collective welfare that transcended individual interests and preferences. Medieval communities operated according to natural rhythms that integrated work, worship, celebration, and rest in patterns that provided structure and meaning to daily life, while creating opportunities for appropriate social interaction that strengthened community bonds and maintained social harmony. Understanding these rhythms helps explain how behavioural expectations, including regulation of humour and laughter, fit naturally into the flow of community life. Daily cycles began with morning prayers and religious observances that set appropriate tones for the day's activities, while bringing community members together in shared spiritual experience that reinforced common values and mutual commitment to proper behaviour. These morning gatherings provided opportunities for community announcements and coordination, while establishing respectful atmospheres that carried into other daily activities. Work patterns that filled most of each day were organised around seasonal needs and community priorities that required cooperation and coordination among many individuals who had to maintain appropriate working relationships that enabled effective completion of essential tasks. Proper behaviour during work activities was crucial for safety, productivity, and maintenance of harmonious relationships among workers. Mealtimes brought families and sometimes larger groups together for shared food and conversation that provided opportunities for social bonding while reinforcing family and community relationships that were essential for mutual support and cooperation. Appropriate behaviour during meals included respectful conversation and consideration for others that strengthened social bonds. Evening activities often included family time, social visits, and community gatherings that provided opportunities for relaxation and enjoyment, while maintaining appropriate standards of behaviour that reflected community values and supported positive relationships among participants. Weekly cycles were structured around religious observances that provided regular opportunities for community gathering, spiritual reflection, and reinforcement of shared values and behavioural expectations. These weekly patterns created predictable rhythms that helped organise community life, while providing regular occasions for addressing community concerns and maintaining social harmony. Seasonal cycles brought different types of activities and social interactions as agricultural work, weather conditions, and religious calendars created varying demands for cooperation and coordination that required flexible adaptation of behavioural expectations while maintaining consistent underlying values and principles. Festival and celebration cycles throughout the year provided special opportunities for community enjoyment and social bonding that were carefully balanced with maintaining appropriate behaviour that reflected the significance of these occasions while creating positive shared experiences that strengthened community identity and solidarity. Life cycle events including births, coming of age, marriages, and deaths created special occasions that brought communities together to mark important transitions while demonstrating support for families and individuals during significant life changes. Appropriate behaviour during these events was essential for providing meaningful support and maintaining community bonds. Economic cycles related to planting, harvesting, trading, and other activities that generated community wealth required coordination and cooperation that depended on maintaining appropriate working relationships and behavioral standards that enabled effective collaboration during important economic activities. Educational cycles that transmitted knowledge and skills from older to younger generations created ongoing opportunities for reinforcing behavioral expectations, while ensuring that essential community knowledge and values were preserved and adapted for changing circumstances and new challenges. Emergency response patterns that communities activated during crises required rapid mobilization of resources and cooperation that depended on established trust and behavioral standards that enabled effective collective action during times when individual survival might depend on community solidarity and mutual assistance. Medieval communities understood that maintaining appropriate behavioral standards, including proper regulation of humor and laughter, was essential for preserving and transmitting the accumulated wisdom that enabled successful community life and individual development. This wisdom included not only practical knowledge about agriculture, crafts, and governance, but also deeper understanding about human nature, social relationships, and spiritual truth that guided community life. Oral traditions that preserved important community knowledge and cultural values depended on maintaining respectful relationships between those who possessed wisdom and those who sought to learn from them. Inappropriate behavior could disrupt these essential transmission processes while showing disrespect for the knowledge and experience that elders and experts had accumulated through years of careful observation and practice. Apprenticeship systems that transmitted technical skills and professional knowledge required maintaining appropriate relationships between masters and students that enabled effective learning while preserving the integrity of craft traditions and professional standards. These relationships depended on mutual respect and appropriate behavior that created conducive learning environments. Religious instruction that provided spiritual guidance and moral education was most effective in communities that maintained appropriate attitudes of reverence and respect that enabled meaningful reception of religious teaching while preserving the sacred character of spiritual knowledge and religious tradition. Family wisdom that passed down practical knowledge about daily living, social relationships, and moral behavior was transmitted through countless informal interactions that required appropriate family relationships and respectful communication that enabled effective learning and character development within family contexts. Community decision-making that drew on accumulated experience and collective wisdom was most effective when conducted in atmospheres of mutual respect and appropriate behavior that enabled careful consideration of different perspectives while maintaining focus on community welfare and shared values. Historical memory that preserved knowledge about past events, successful practices, and lessons learned from previous challenges was maintained through storytelling and informal education that required respectful attention to those who possessed this important knowledge and understanding of its significance for current and future decision-making. Conflict resolution wisdom that had developed through generations of experience with managing disputes and maintaining community harmony was preserved and applied through processes that required appropriate behavior and respectful participation from all parties involved in addressing conflicts and rebuilding damaged relationships. Innovation and adaptation that enabled communities to respond effectively to new challenges and opportunities was most successful when it built respectfully on existing wisdom while maintaining appropriate consideration for traditional knowledge and established practices that had proven effective over time. Cultural preservation that maintained community identity and values while adapting to changing circumstances required maintaining appropriate respect for traditional practices and cultural expressions while enabling creative adaptation that preserved essential cultural elements in new contexts and situations. Professional development that enabled individuals to advance in their chosen fields and contribute more effectively to community welfare was enhanced by maintaining appropriate relationships with those who possessed advanced knowledge, and by demonstrating respectful appreciation for the learning opportunities that such relationships provided. Intergenerational cooperation that enabled communities to benefit from both youthful energy and mature wisdom was most effective when conducted within frameworks of mutual respect and appropriate behavior that honored the contributions that different generations could make to community welfare and individual development. Medieval communities operated according to principles of shared responsibility that recognized how individual behavior affected community welfare, while providing mutual support and guidance that helped everyone fulfill their obligations to the collective good. This understanding of interconnected responsibility helped explain why behavioral standards, including regulation of humour and laughter, were considered essential for community survival and prosperity. Individual accountability within community contexts emphasised that personal choices and behaviour had consequences that extended beyond individual welfare to affect family members, neighbours, and the broader community that provided support and protection for everyone's daily needs and long-term security. Family responsibilities that connected individual behaviour to family welfare and reputation created incentives for maintaining appropriate conduct that reflected well on family members, while providing support and guidance for developing proper behavioural patterns that contributed to family harmony and community standing. Neighbourhood obligations that arose from close physical proximity and shared resources required maintaining appropriate relationships with nearby residents who could provide essential assistance during emergencies while depending on mutual respect and cooperation for managing shared facilities and resolving common problems. Occupational duties that connected individual work performance to community economic welfare required maintaining appropriate professional behaviour that contributed to collective prosperity while upholding standards of quality and reliability that protected community reputation and economic relationships. Religious responsibilities that connected individual spiritual welfare to community religious health emphasised the importance of proper behaviour during worship activities, while recognising that individual moral conduct affected the spiritual atmosphere and divine favour that communities depended upon for protection and blessing. Civic obligations that arose from membership in political communities required appropriate participation in governance activities and respect for legitimate authority, while contributing to collective decision-making processes that affected everyone's welfare and security. Economic interdependence that connected individual prosperity to community economic health required maintaining appropriate business relationships and trading practices that supported collective economic welfare while protecting the trust and cooperation that enabled beneficial economic exchanges and development. Educational responsibilities that connected individual learning to community knowledge preservation required appropriate relationships between teachers and students, while recognising that individual development contributed to community intellectual resources and cultural continuity. Cultural participation that connected individual creativity and expression to community cultural health required maintaining appropriate balance between personal, artistic expression and respect for community values and traditions that preserved cultural identity while enabling creative development. Environmental stewardship that connected individual resource use to community environmental health required appropriate consideration for shared natural resources, while recognising that individual conservation efforts contributed to collective environmental sustainability and long-term community welfare. Emergency preparedness that connected individual readiness to community resilience during crises required maintaining appropriate cooperative relationships and mutual assistance capabilities, while recognising that community survival during emergencies depended on collective preparation and individual responsibility. Future planning that connected individual decisions to community long-term welfare required appropriate consideration for how current choices would affect future generations, while maintaining commitment to preserving and improving community resources and capabilities for continued prosperity and development. So as we come to the quiet close of our gentle exploration through the careful world of medieval social expectations, we can see how these thoughtful guidelines for appropriate behaviour created stable, supportive communities where everyone understood their responsibilities and opportunities, while working together to build lives of meaning, security, and mutual prosperity that honoured both human dignity and divine purpose in the ordered rhythm of daily life that made medieval communities resilient and enduring despite the many challenges they faced.